My name is Andre Cohen, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us for this particular session. And this particular learning lesson will be taken in two parts. First will be an independent study piece where you will go through our curriculum at your own pace. And the second part of the course will be a webinar style conference that we will do after you've completed your independent study. One of the things that we hope that you'll find is that there are intriguing and insightful concepts and ideas that you'll have to wrestle with, that you'll have the opportunity to kind of look at and examine for yourself to see how you can be most effective in your work environment. And so as you go through the independent study and you prepare for our conference webinar, we look forward to seeing who you become through this process. My name is Andre Cohen, and we thank you for joining us.
Welcome to this lesson. Andre and our staff have combed through our best lectures, speeches, and presentations to bring you today's principle. As you watch these lessons, keep in mind how you might best apply the morals, wisdom, and principles in your ordinary daily activities. We know that what we practice and support with intention, we can improve on. Leadership and diversity advocacy requires that we practice both mentally and in the demonstration of our values. Take this time to reflect on your behaviors, build on your strengths, and minimize your areas of weakness. Remember, we look forward to seeing who you become. Andre and our team at AM Horizons will start you on this journey now.
Folks online, you will see that the slides are, you can go through them at your pace. In the room, we'll be going through them at a different pace. So you can keep up, and I'll make reference to which slides that we're on, but you can advance those at your convenience. So to get started, don't have my staff person online to kind of answer questions. So at breaks, I will go back in. So if you have questions, leave them in the chat rooms, or you have responses, leave them in the chat rooms, and I'll get back to those when we have a break here in the room. So negotiate both of those. I didn't bring a staff member today, so that's why it is the way it is. For those who are on the webinar, as well as those of you who are in class, I hope you know that I'm prepared for today's session. I hope you get that impression. We sent out notices. We have a PowerPoint presentation here. You have a handout and notes. As we think about my agenda, I also am curious as to your agenda. So why did you choose to come and have this conversation on this particular day? And so what are you hoping to get out of this, and why did you come? So it might help us to share names if you feel comfortable with that. If not, that's fine too. I'd like to go first with kind of why you came or what your hopes are. Yes.
Sure, my name is Leah, and I've actually heard you speak before on cultural diversity and things like that, and the time that we need to kind of rebuild our community, and for all of us to examine where we are, another topic, and how we can all be a better community.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'm Ann, and I'm originally from the area. I grew up about 10 miles away, so this community be a part of welcoming and making sure that our community does not exclude people based on race or based on factors other than their own character.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
My name is Dean, just here for general awareness and understanding needs, solutions, issues.
Cool. Thank you.
My name is Jessica. I work in the mental health field with children, and they've been talking and asking questions, and so I'm here to gain some tools to help guide conversations and things in a developmentally appropriate way.
All right, great. Thank you.
Patty. I also came here just to kind of gather information. tired of feeling sad for our community, really, and feeling like absorbed, the better I will be able to pass on that information. I work in early childhood family education, so I'm in the St. Cloud school district, and you know, like the mamas and the daddies that come in with the little babies to be on the ground level, knowing that, you know.
Yeah. You said something, and I want to explore that just for a little bit, because you said that you're tired of being sad. The sadness is rooted, like.
For me, the sadness is that people simply don't understand. There's a lot of judging.
Understand
and
what?
Understand that the moms and the dads have come into our classrooms and come in with their babies, that we're all the same. We want to be the best parent we can be.
Yep.
And whether that culture is a central Minnesota German farm folk like me, or came here from wherever, that really in our hearts we just want to be the best parents that we can be. And how can we do that all together and share our experiences and community and support each other?
Okay.
And so I guess my sadness is that feels that I need to get everyone to really understand that.
Okay.
A baby is a baby, and they all deserve the same education and be treated equal.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I
Cool.
guess that's kind of where my sadness comes from.
Yeah, and the reason I asked you about that sadness was because that's what led me to this conversation. And I could not figure out what I was sad about, because I didn't necessarily know the people who were being victimized. Like Eric Gardner, I didn't know that guy. Like his family, my family aren't connected in any kind of anyone seen Streetville Station? Right, so it's a great film to watch. Oscar, I forgot Oscar's last name. But at any rate, he was shot by the transit police. The series of all of Tamir Rice. I didn't know those people. I don't know them. But I was feeling this sense of sadness, and I couldn't figure out what it was until I figured out what it was. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what I've learned about that sadness and how we can kind of overcome that. I have a political leaning that I have to be outright and just tell you that I lean to the Constitution of the United States. That's the backbone that gives me. Because I don't know if you've been to diversity trainings or cultural competence trainings or whatnot. They spend a lot of time talking about touchy-feely stuff, right? Which is great, and we need to have those conversations. But where are the teeth? I would submit that if a training that you're going to is not pointing back to the Constitution, I wonder what they're pointing to. Our law of the land. That is one of the things that makes this a great country, is the fact that we have a Constitution that we live by. The binding essence of America is around that great and sacred document. Can I say booger? Is anyone offended by booger?
I'm offended by nothing.
Okay, good. So have you ever had a friend who had a hanger, a snoogie, whatever, in their nose? Has that ever happened? Yeah. What did you tell that friend about that thing in their nose? What did you tell them?
A little something, something.
You said you got a little something, right? What else? Or how else did you tell them?
Without words, just.
Okay, so without words, you just kind of signal to them, and why are you signaling to them that they have a little hanger in their nose? Like why do you not want that to?
Gross.
Because it's gross, right?
It's uncomfortable.
It makes you uncomfortable. What else? Friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want it for them, right? You don't want it for them because they can't necessarily see it. I can see it, and I don't want that for them. But what's also my hope, because this is my friend, they will do this, they will reciprocate. They will do the same for me. And so although I love this great country, I am a friend of this country, I am obligated to let them know when they have boogers in their nose. And so the conversation that we're having is not one that says, I don't love this country, because I do love this country. I pay taxes in this country. I participate in the political movements of this country. And therefore, this is something that's close to me, so I can tell it when something's not right. In order to help it be corrected, because not only do I want it for them, but I also want it for myself. Because when we're whole, when we're actually able to live by that sacred document, we're all better for that. So that's my monologue. That's my introduction. So this, I'll try to separate between videos, lectures, and assignments that I'm going to give you. The first assignment that I want to give you is on page 3, because this is a working document, and we'll skip around. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 gray circles. What I want you to do is to put one thing that you value in each one of those gray circles. One thing that you value or that is important to you. Person, a significant other, niece, nephew, cousin, grandparent. It could be a thing like a car or a cabin home. It could be a place like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a concept like justice or love. Each one of those. And those of you on online, you can also do the same thing. Just draw 5 circles and just put your values. And I want you to listen to how we're sharing that in this room, so that because I think you'll get the same effect that we're going to experience. All right. So do most people have? Okay, I see 5, 4, 5. Okay, 4. So we'll go ahead and get started. What I want to do is play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is I want you to find people who either agree with, who say, yes, that's a great thing, I like that, agree with what you have on your paper, or they have something similar on their paper. Once you have found those individuals, I want you to put your initials next to the thing that you agree with or that you actually share. All right? So I want you to go around this room, find things that you agree with or that you share in common, and sign next to that thing. You have 90 seconds to do that, starting now.
Okay. Okay. Family. Even though I would say that this has a lot to do with it.
All right. What have you got there? Yeah.
Yes, that's it. I was going to say, yeah, but I feel like almost everybody usually has family. You have to find which one was mine. This one's yours? Okay.
I have a bike
60 seconds, 60 seconds.
in my life where I would have put that down.
Yeah. You're great, but
Right?
Well, maybe kind of.
Yes, yes. A word for the same thing, right?
45 seconds.
I forgot you agreed.
Oh, sure.
Same alphabet.
2, 1. So I am making the assumption, and those of you who are on the webinar, I'm making the same assumption about you as well. And that as you were looking at each other's papers, that everyone was at least able to sign on one thing. Right? Okay, good, good. So as you were looking at other people's papers, were there things that you saw that you were like, wow, why didn't I think of that? Or I should have wrote that down. What were some of those things that you said I should have written down? Joy, all right, was one.
Community.
Community was one.
Friends.
Friends was another.
Health.
Health. Did you have one that you saw and you were like, ah,
Probably the community and health.
okay. So
On the other hand, I saw one. Church. People still go to church.
yes, people still go to church.
Because church and religion to me are one and the same.
Yep.
But spirituality in a thing is a different thing.
Yep. So you're going to love our presentation today. All right. You're right in the same kind of vein that we're running in. And so as you were finding people to sign on things, were there some things that were more difficult? Maybe it was because of language, or you had to talk through something that was get anybody to sign on. Was there anything that was left blank that you didn't find someone to sign on?
Nobody signed my bike.
Nobody signed your bike, right? So what do you use your bike for?
I use it for joy.
For recreation,
And
right?
recreation, exercise.
Exercise, recreation. So please raise your hand if you value, even if you don't have a chance to do it, but you value recreation and exercise. Please raise your hand.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah. So even though the word may have thrown us off, but the intention of that is something that we all can share it, right? Was there something else that somebody else? Yeah.
Nobody acknowledged or agreed necessarily with openness and self. And to me, those are kind of the same, because to me, self is my openness.
Yeah.
And I like openness.
Please raise your hand if you value yourself, right? Yeah, this idea, right? But to be fair, I asked you to write down 5 things, and you value much more than 5 things, right? So there was a lot of opportunities to miss things or not add things, but introduce this particular exercise at this particular time in this workshop. Introducing this.
Looking for commonality.
Looking for commonalities. Okay. What else? To point out the differences as well. Right. One of the things that I'm a big proponent of, and if there is something that I can be negatively or not given, not people misunderstanding me, is around the fact that I want people to be a critical thinker. People to be critical thinkers, and kind of counterculture these days, right? Because everything is so automatic or force-fed or polarized. But I really want us to be critical thinkers, and so that oftentimes in diversity and diversity trainings, they don't encourage that critical thinking. And so they have a definition for this, that, or the other thing. To offer you something, and typically they're pretty simple, they're pretty polarized answers. And so what I'd like to offer you is to take what I'm offering you, what I'm giving you today, and not believe everything and see what works. Because it is my belief that diversity really is about that balance of commonalities and differences. And too often, trainings have spent a great deal of time on either or, but never both. About how we work with our families, as we think about how we work with community members, I really want us to grab a hold of this concept of both and. Some time talking about this idea of both and. But yeah, that diversity is both our commonalities. Hello, come on in. This is in our commonalities. Third, any other things that you thought of as you were doing that exercise or you're reflecting on that exercise?
There were similarities among some of the other folks that I saw. Check and say, like, does that kind of mean the same thing that I wrote down? So what came up for me is that we might both be talking about, just have different words for it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So we may be talking about similar things, but just have different words for them. Now, this is the thing I want to. So I'm making the assumption that none of your parents know each other. Is that a safe assumption? Okay. So how is it that you ended up having similar values? Culture. Okay.
Brainwashing since we were little.
Brainwashing since we were little. Okay, you're a Noam Chomsky fan, I would imagine, right? All right. How do we come up with these similar values? How were we able to sign on things that? What do you think?
Some of it's learned behavior.
So some of it is learned behavior, group norms. Okay. It's much more simpler. I mean, the answer is very simple, and you're way overthinking it.
Or just being human.
Our humanity, right? Our humanity allows us to have these similar values. Now, this is one thing that, and we'll dig deeper into this, particularly as we talk about the nuances of, blue lives, black lives, and all lives mattering. As we delve into those nuances, I want you to be mindful of is that all human behavior is goal-directed. Our humanity as humans that drive us. However, the methods that we use to get to those goals may be different. All right. So the ultimate drive, and I remember, and I can't remember if it was Sting or the Police, but they sang a song, "I hope the Russians love their children too." Song, and I can't remember if it was Sting or the Police, but I guess it doesn't really matter, because when they sang that song, why were they singing "They hope the Russians love their children"? Like, what was the driving force behind those lyrics? So they were looking for the commonality. So the song was written in the late 80s, in the early 90s. What was the world condition like?
Well, it was in a time when there was this, I can't remember when the Soviet Union fell, but it was at a time when there was still some conflict.
Yeah.
And I would guess that when we talk about the use of force here and talk about our children, are our children going to be sent to war? Are our children going to be at risk? I would hope that the people on the other side are making decisions thinking about their children, because we're more likely to get to a decision that there's life.
Yeah, and that is exactly the sentiment that is eloquently delivered in the song, right? I hope the Russians love their children too, because we were still in the Cold War. And, I remember the most terrifying movie I ever saw in my life, outside of Salem's Lot on television, was The Day After. Does anybody remember that in the 80s? It was, what if a bomb fell, and then what would the day after look like, and that kind of stuff. And just absolutely terrified me. So nuclear proliferation was something, as a small child, I was always aware of, like being afraid of that. And so apparently, I guess the Russians do love their children too, right? Because we have not had that nuclear war that was such a fear in the 80s. It's that humanness. It's we want similar things, but how we get to those things may be very different. Have an activity for you right now that we will come back to. And if you could answer, and I will make sure that the webinar folks do these as well. So folks on the webinar just handed out and it has 3 sections. The first section is, it's misspelled here, sorry. When you hear Black Lives Matter, right? So when you hear Lives Matter, what do you hear? And so what do you think they mean? Whoever they is that is saying Black Lives Matter, what do you think they mean? What do you think they hear when they hear Black Lives Matter, right? So when you hear Black Lives Matter, what do you think they feel when they say Black Lives Matter? How do you feel when said? How do you feel? So what do you think they mean? What do you think they feel? What do you hear? And then what do you feel when you Lives Matter? The next section is when you hear Blue Lives Matter. What do you?
And that's the second one?
That's the second one. Yeah, it says Black Lives Matter. Okay. I want you to change that to Blue Lives Matter. And so what do you think that means? And what do you think they feel, and what do you hear? And then the last one, it also says Black Lives Matter, but I want you to change that to All Lives Matter. Ideology. It's a life can't lose. Mr. Cruise Ship safe will protect you. Subscribe to the point of view. See to operations of which you try to. All right. So we'll come back to those in, but I wanted to get you thinking about yourself and the other. So if we go back to our handout, we go back to page 2. So there are some So reasons we're having this conversation, and some of those are because of our moral imperatives for justice. Freedom versus liberty. What is the difference between freedom and liberty? Freedom and liberty. Because people try to use the words interchangeably. They're quite different words with quite different meanings. Freedom versus liberty. All right, let's.
I see them as the same.
You see them as the same, right? Yep.
Still.
The same. Because there wouldn't be two words if they meant the same thing. So there's a reason why the words are different, right? So this idea of anyone a member of a gym, you go to a gym or a community center or something like that. So what's the name of your gym? Midtown Fitness. All right. So Midtown Fitness. So you are a member at Midtown Fitness. Is that correct? So how'd you become a member?
You just sign up and pay a fee.
Okay, so you signed up and you paid a fee. As a guest, can I go to Midtown Fitness?
Policy, but it's definitely not as open as a membership.
Okay, so as a guest, I can get a guest pass that will probably be good for how long?
At one time.
Probably one time, right? In there, and I have a guest pass, I have the freedom to use their stuff. Is that correct? As a member, you have the freedom to use their stuff. And what kind of stuff do they have at your gym?
They have cardio and weights.
So cardio and weights in there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they have a track, so you can run or walk on the track. Is there like a sauna or anything in there? Okay, cool. Do they have a pool?
They do.
Oh, they do have a pool. Sweet,
yeah.
sweet. Right. So once you are a member, you get the freedom to use their stuff. But what happens if I'm not a member and I try to go use their stuff? So it's day 2, and I take my day pass and I try to go day 2. What happens? I do not have. I cannot use their stuff. I don't have the freedom to do it. Right? Freedom of membership. Members get the freedom to do things. So then what is this idea of liberty? Liberty says, I don't need to be a member to do these things. Walk around a park. Membership in the Midtown Fitness Center to do that. No, I don't have to be a member to do that. That I can use with my membership, but I can also go to a lake and go swim as I could in the thing. And so membership has its privileges, and that privilege is called freedom. But I'm at liberty to not have to have a membership. It doesn't have to my life and how I interact with the world does not have to be contingent. That's why immigration is such an important conversation to have, because it's about the privileges of so-called members. Interesting, because the people who are trying to define that are also the great-grandsons and granddaughters of people who weren't always legal immigrants themselves, but short-term memory serves us well at times, right? And I'm sorry, we've kind of introduced ourselves, and you'll get a chance to know us more. But if you could just tell us your name and what are your hopes for this workshop?
My name is Peggy, and I coordinate the Senior Language Program for Council on Aging. There's been a lot of controversy about this, and I have my own feelings on these terms that are being used, and just trying to see how we can incorporate that into the work that we do. I'll call it.
So thank you. Yeah, and hopefully we'll give you some tools that will be helpful in having this conversation. No, those are some important points. And so when we look at those three areas, we'll talk about those three things and what is happening when we talk about those things in that way. And so this idea of freedom versus liberty, freedom, it is really about this idea of members having access to things, and liberty is not having to have that, right? How many people have heard that term, social justice? And how have people used that term? What does that mean, social justice?
I think are the societal norms set up to be fair to everybody?
Okay, so are the societal norms set up to be fair to everyone? Okay. What does that mean, or how have people use that?
I think it's used in the wrong context a lot.
Okay. Say more about that. So how or what is...
Yeah, put it into words here, but I think people use that social justice when they feel like they are not on the receiving end of it.
Okay.
You know, they use that term, you know, we're fighting for social justice, and I always feel like it's the folks who feel like they're not receiving social justice that use the term of, you know what I mean? Like,
right. So what is it though? I mean, because if they're going to use this thing, use them, but I should also try to know what they're talking about when they say this idea of social justice. What I will offer you is that it has become very convoluted. Now, one thing I hope you see this in the work presented is that I was a middle school teacher, and I taught high school as well. I was in the classroom for 8 years, and I would have these conversations with my students, and realized that some of the conversation didn't make sense, because my 8th graders would ask me a particular question, and I'd be like, I would be stumped, right? And I'm trying to introduce them to these concepts, until I realized I have to back up and make it more simple. And it's the simplicity that actually leads us to knowing what these things are, right? So social justice is simply making sure that people get everything the law says they should. That's social justice. All this other stuff that people try to add to it just complicates it, but it's simply saying the law says this, you have the right to this, let's make sure that happens. That's social justice. Making sure people have access to everything that the law says that they have. And if there are things that people need and the law doesn't provide for it, guess what my job now is? To help change the laws, right? So early in my conversation, I said that the Constitution is my backbone. When we talk about social justice, this gives me drive and energy and passion to be able to actually talk about things that can happen and make change. Justice is the right thing to do. It is the process of the law. So looking at the laws, and there are just laws and unjust laws. Laws and unjust laws. What would you consider to be a just law? Considered a just law. Homicide is wrong. Killing people would be wrong. There should be consequences for human beings who kill other human beings. And that's interesting, because that also comes out of some of those religious traditions that also say that, right? So why in the ancient world did they have to come up with these kinds of laws? Why were those important to do? On religion, but I find it interesting that most major religions have some of these same themes. Why did religions have some of these same things? You know, not killing, not stealing, not taking other people's stuff.
I think it makes it easier to hold people accountable if you can say, here are the rules, you broke the rules.
So what is the purpose of the rules? What is the purpose of this accountability?
Life.
Peace and comfort and life. Human beings can't live together if we're going to destroy each other. It's just not right. So a just law is anything that allows us to continue living, that continues harmony and peace and encourages those things, right? That's why all of those, our ancient ancestors came up with those things, because they said we have to survive. And this is how we survive. This is how we live in community. Law, I would say, would be the opposite of that. It would be a law that does not encourage everyone to either have a safe place to live, that advances their life. And so what we call that is, we've given a term to that, which is the term discrimination. And we'll talk more about that. But we said that laws that discriminate against people, who don't allow them to have equal access to their life and their fulfillment, right? So this idea of just laws and unjust laws. That. So I want to play a video for you. Oh no, I don't want to play the video. There. So back to page 2. There is there's a picture of a mountaintop, and there are several circles to kind of point out some points that lead us to. And this is a of the Reverend Dr. King's last speech. And does anyone know what the title of his last speech was?
Is that the I Have a Dream?
It was not the I Have a Dream speech. It was the Mountaintop Speech. Now, one thing as people who I think are friends and possibly even allies, is I want you to recognize and think about what you want to do with the uncomfortableness that you may have with what you know and what you don't know. Right? So, for example, if you look at all of Dr. King's speeches and you can name only one by title, to do, because the Dr. speech, he certainly did, right? And so this was one of his most profound speeches. And the thing that's very interesting is that this is also his last speech. It's his last speech. Sunday night, Monday morning, he wakes up, goes out on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, and receives an assassin's bullet in the neck. He's dead. The thing about this particular speech is that Martin was not supposed to give this speech. He was supposed to be doing some other things. That this was kind of a rabbit trail, if you will, of something that he felt that he was compelled to do, that he had to do. And does anyone know why he was in Birmingham giving this speech?
I think there was a garbage workers strike.
There was a garbage workers strike. Now, the interesting thing about this garbage workers strike is that this is also coming off the heels and the wheels of the Birmingham bus boycott. Down this whole city. And so now there's this cry to help these sanitation workers. And the interesting thing about that was that they were black and white sanitation workers that he went to go help and speak for. And so he goes down there to offer his assistance. He's tired. He has the flu. And he does something that's very interesting. So Coretta Scott, his wife, was a good Southern belle. And so as a Southern belle, he wanted to keep her happy. He would send her fresh flowers every time that he went out to a speaking engagement or event. And this particular one was different because he sent her plastic flowers. Southern belle, she was a little taken back by this. Like, when I'm used to getting real flowers, how many people would question what's going on if you got, if there's a change in behavior, right? So she calls him up and she's like, Martin, what's going on? And he says to her in so many words, I don't feel good about this particular, feel good about it. And so she can hear the depression in his voice and his unassuredness in his voice. And she's a good wife to him. Do as a good wife. She tries to make him feel better. She encourages him. Do this. You've done this before. This is no different than any other thing. And so she's pumping him up, and he's feeling a little bit better. And he says, yeah, okay, I can do this. And so she says, well, tell me about these flowers. What's going on with these flowers? He said, well, I wanted you to have something to remember me by. We know about real flowers. They die, they fade, right? And so he said that to her, and then he gives the speech. And here are the quintessential words, or the most compelling words that he says in this particular speech, the Mountaintop Speech. No, what will happen now? We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind, like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. I learned about that now. Do God's will. And he has allowed me to go up to the mountaintop. And I've seen, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight about anything. I'm not worried about any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. In that short passage, what do you hear in Martin's delivery?
Clairvoyance.
He's got some clairvoyance. That's a fancy word. Can you just break that down?
Could sense what was impending.
He could sense what's impending. He could sense what was coming, right? What else? What else do you hear in that? You hear peace. So he's coming to terms with this idea that he knows something is coming, and he doesn't know if this is the time or another time is coming, but he's okay with it. What does he hear? What else do you hear?
Hope.
Hope. And what phraseology gives hope here?
Plan. He can see it. He might not get there, but the people are going to get there.
But what does he say specifically? I might not make it, but
I want you to know tonight that we as a people,
we will make it. Right? He said we will make it. He didn't say black people. He didn't say white people. He didn't say Hispanics, Asians, Hmong, Somali. He said we as a people. Now, why is the Reverend Dr. King using words like promised land and mountaintop? Use those.
I'm not a biblical scholar, but I think there are some references that would resonate with people who are.
Yeah, so there are messages. So there's some messages that would resonate with people who are that way. Why else is he using? Why else is he using that? I apologize.
Because preachers like colorful speech.
So preachers like colorful speech. But why mountaintop? Why didn't he use like lake and river? Why didn't he use fishes and loaves? Why mountaintop and promised land? Did anyone see the so TNT often in April has the Charlton Heston movie, The 10 Commandments? Anyone ever seen that? Right. And what is that story of? Moses goes to the mountaintop, and what is Moses? Why is Moses going to the mountaintop? He's going to meet God, but for what purpose? What's Moses doing out there? Hanging out by himself?
Life.
Oh, he's with the Israelites. And why is he with the Israelites?
Because they were fleeing.
Because they were fleeing bondage. So Dr. King said, you know what? This struggle, this civil rights struggle seems very familiar to me. It's very similar to an old biblical story. So I can bring those two things together. Now, here's the irony. That the leader of that ancient struggle didn't make it into the promised land. And neither did the leader of that modern struggle make it into the promised land. But did the people ultimately make it? Yes. And so what I would suggest is Dr. King going to come back and finish the work? No, he's not. Whose responsibility is it to finish the work? Is Gandhi going to come back and finish his work? Is Mother Teresa going to come back and finish her work? Is Nelson Mandela, Harriet Tubman, or Cesar Chavez, is he going to come back and finish the work? No. So if the work is going to be finished, who's going to have to do the work? Right? We'll have to do the work. And this is the thing that I want you to walk away with. One of the many things that I want you to walk away with. But this idea that you are someone's Mother Teresa, you are someone's Dr. King. You are impactful. Your voice actually liberates someone else. And sometimes it's not even people you know. I like the dollar store. It makes me feel good about myself. The store makes me feel good about myself because I can afford everything in it. I go to Macy's and I need a therapy session afterwards, right? I was in Macy's once and they had long pants or short pants or long shorts. But they were like $300 and they did not come with an app. $100, you should have an app, right? But I'm in the dollar store and there's a family there, a male, a female, and a small baby. And so I'm standing there, I have my trinkets and I'm ready to go. And this couple is, they pulls out apple juice and put simultaneously the guy that she's with turns and looks at something shiny. She pulls out her EBT card. Are you familiar with EBT cards, electronic benefit cards, right? So she's at mid-swipe of this card. He turns around and he says, "You stupid boop. How the boop are you using that EBT card for stupid apple juice? You're always so boop, 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 boop." So the store is crowded. And so all the people in the store say the same thing I said. This stuff at the dollar store. How much is this? Right? Because what are we saying to ourselves as this thing is going down?
I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say. What's the overarching chorus that we're singing? This is none of my business. And so nobody says anything. I have a little voice that encourages me to do things that I'm not capable of doing on my own, and I trust it. And so the voice says, "Say something," and I'm like, "Are you crazy? This dude is just going off. You want me to say something? Pick somebody else." And the voice said, "No, say something." So I made a deal with the voice. I said, "Okay, voice, I'll say something if they're still in the parking lot after I'm done doing my thing." Right? So I'm trying, I'm running my card and taking my time, so they can disappear. And the cashier is like, "Will you come on?" And I'm like, "Hey, I had a deal," right? So I start, and guess what? They're out in the parking lot. By this time, they've now entered into a grocery store, and so and the guy is still rah 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 rah. So follow them into the grocery store. Now I have enough sense to not tap a stranger on the shoulder and say, "I want to talk to you," right? So I go around an aisle, I meet them face to face, and I see the guy, and I want to tell you that the voice was very encouraging up until this point. I get nothing from the voice, and so now I have to stall. So I'm stalling. So I tell I asked the guy, I said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And he puffs up. "About what?" And so I put my ears down, I tuck my tail between my legs. I want to show that I'm non-threatening. And I said, "Sir, I just want to talk to you for a second. Can you step over here?" Now I asked him to take a step. So it was a social cue for the mom and the baby to give us some space. And so we're standing here face to face, he and I, and he says to me, and I said, "Well, sir," And then the voice says, open your mouth. And I open my mouth, and this is what comes out of my mouth. So I open my mouth just like the voice says. And I said, so I open my mouth, and this is what comes out. Sir, I've learned about women. If you want her to grow, you have to water her and give her sunshine. Now, I repeated what the voice told me to say, not for the guy, but for me, because I didn't know what that was. So I say that, and then I said, do you understand? And he looks at me. And it's like scales fell off of him and are sitting as a puddle on the ground. And he looks at me and he says, yes, sir, I do. Have a great day. See you later. Boom. I left. Right? What do you think might have happened in that interaction? Happened either for him or for other folks in that interaction.
In the store with him initially, it could have been worse in how he went off on you.
Yeah, it could have been worse on how he went off on me. So that was a risk I was taking, right? Right? That was a risk I was taking. Some of the things that may have been happening in that scenario.
He was very defensive when you first approached him, and that after you spoke, he was able to maybe take that big deep exhale and just be like, okay, I don't need to be so defensive. Yeah, so there was some kind of transition that he went through in the process of us interacting with one another, right? Possible transition. One of the things that terrified me about even getting involved was if I said the wrong thing, who is going to pay for my intervention?
She is.
She was. So that was my fear. So I'm praying, I'm hoping, I'm like, give me the right things to say. Time, that was the right thing to say.
Was he black or white?
I can answer that question. And I would suggest that the answer is less important than the story itself. An American man.
Would you have said the same to somebody who was white?
Asking me, would I have said something similar to someone who was white? And the answer that you're asking me to that question is yes. The question for you to ask yourself is, given that a situation similar to that or that situation, oracle, what would you have done? Because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. So I'm giving you these things as principles to think about how to do those things, how to be actual in the world. Because that's what Dr. King is talking about. That's how we get freedom, is when in our circles of influence, we say something.
And said, these things aren't that important in life.
And what do you think how would that have gone on?
I almost stuck it in his pocket and said, what a dumbass.
Okay. Helpful, not helpful?
I think it would have been helpful, but
if he walks around and calls you a bad name because you interacted with him, is that helpful or not helpful?
Oh, there's nothing. He's exercising something. Okay. I'm not offended by that stuff. Okay. So I think it's a good thing. It doesn't boil things under the skin. It just releases them and then they're gone. And that's the end of the topic. And it's percolating still.
Okay.
There is nothing left to it.
Okay. Other folks.
I feel like he may have looked at that gesture as offensive. It really wasn't about the dollar either.
Yeah. So what was it about?
He had the power.
Oh, power. Power. So let me explain some stuff, and then we'll come back to that in just a second. So flip over to go to page 3. Back to page 3. In that situation, what that man was trying to exert and what he was exerting without anyone reflecting a mirror back on him or having him be or causing him cognitive dissonance was that he was trying to get 3 things. He was trying to get significance, he was trying to get belonging, and he was trying to get safety. Right? Braggadocious or hyper-masculine or hyper-violent persona trying to get safety. That worked for him. Do you think that worked for him? Do you think it worked?
No.
Say. What do you mean by that?
Well, it releases certain feelings, that gives certain strength, that also gives some guilt, and I think it's all of that stuff, and it's important and it's not important at the
That's
same
right.
time.
For him, yes. Was it necessarily getting him everything that he thought? Probably no. It was certainly limiting to him, right? And so my job in that particular situation was to offer a contradiction for him. And it wasn't necessarily for him, and it wasn't for the woman, but it was for the child. When we interact with folks and we give them cognitive dissonance, we make them think about what they're saying. It's not necessarily just for them. It's also for everyone that they're responsible for. All human beings are looking for these things. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that was kind of the beauty of what you said, is it was so that it's hard to be angry and try to figure that out at the same time. And then once that out, you're not telling them to be anything. You're not saying they have been anything. You're just making a statement. Process it and it's in their life without there's significance.
Right. We're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging. And I would venture to say that if you look at those 5 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that you wrote down, that they meet one of those criteria of safety, significance, or belonging. Significance says I'm a person with purpose and power. Belonging suggests that I'm in relationships with people who understand my purpose and power. Right? You hang out with. Do they recognize your brilliance, your beauty, your quirkiness? I would suggest that they do. That's why they're your friends. So we're always looking for safety, significance, and belonging. And safety simply suggests that I am physically, mentally, and emotionally safe. People who understand my significance. Right? Yes.
This is a real situation, and it happened to me firsthand. Attempting to go from First Street in St. Cloud to Division. 2 Somali men are crossing in the middle of the road. No problem. I do it all the time. The intersection. I'm used to that, and I can't be critical. However, of the 2, one crosses the road, safety, and the other one stands in front of my car. He waves the one who's already across the road in front of my car. And I thought, how should I best handle this? Everybody involved. And my question to you is, what would you have done or said?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Individual that I fight when I have to. So I'm down for a good fight when I have to. Not necessarily a physical fight, but a confrontation. I'm down for a confrontation. But I try to avoid them as much as possible because it takes so much out of me. So it's funny because I had a kid, he wasn't Somali, but he was an African-American kid, walking across the street. And he didn't stop, but he certainly walked a lot slower once he got in front of my car. And so he's got his headphones on and he's walking, and he's kind of paying attention to me because, he doesn't know if I'm going to hit him or not, right? So he's also playing that. Frustrated. So in my frustration, and I give him a head nod. So I smile. I'm frustrated. I smile. I give him a genuine smile. I hold it and I just go. And then he smirks back at me because he knows that I know that he power move as he is going across the street. Right? What could I have done? I could have slammed the car in park. I could have rolled down my window. I could have gave him a piece of my mind. Young man, that's exactly what he was looking for. That was the fight that he wanted to justify his behavior. As a high school teacher, I learned early on what they want. But you don't give it to them how they want it. So why is the kid walking across the street slowly? He wants respect. He wants dignity. He wants to see him. So what do? I see him, but I don't see him how he wants me to see him. Man who's looking for safety, significance, and belonging. He's trying to do his little power move on me in front of the car. So cool. No, go for it. Have it. I was at a family festival, and a kid is walking around with these condoms, just holding condoms up in the air. So people are walking past, and he's in the middle of the path holding condoms up. To the kid. But I looked at him and I said, in my look, I was like, right? What do you think he did? Put him in his pocket, went on some other place. Maybe he did it some other place or whatever. But I was like, what's the purpose? Been in situations, and again, these are my situations. These are my spheres of influence, but I want you to think about your spheres of influence. And why people need to say this idea that Black Lives Matter, and why people need to say Blue Lives Matter, and why we need to say All Lives Matter. In a store, and kids are cussing up a storm, calling each other the N-word, right? They're saying the N-word. Now, again, this is me. This is how I handled it. To the kids, and I said, can you guys stop using? Well, one of the bigger kids comes up face to face to me. And so I kind of, take my defensive stance. I know about takedowns and all this kind of stuff. I wrestled in high school and college. I worked in residential treatment. So they taught us how to, do all sorts of stuff. So, I kind of prepare myself, but not trying to escalate anything, but just kind of prepare myself. The kid comes up to me face to face. He's a little taller than me. And he looks down at me and he says, "Yes, sir." Why did they respond? Because I greeted them with respect. Can you stop saying that? Would your mind stop saying that? Right? No, they could have said no. They could have blah, 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 blah. But I think they met my respect with respect. And so give people what they want. People need safety, significance, and belonging. Give it to them. They want power. Give them the power, but not necessarily the way that they expect. Does that make sense? So yeah, no, because there'll be tons of folks who will try to goad you into a certain types of behavior. And I think this Black Lives, All Lives, and Blue Lives Matter thing is one of those things that aren't thinking about. And when I say not thinking about, they're not using their whole brain when it comes to it. Because all three can be true simultaneously. Matter and Black lives can matter. All lives can matter and blue lives can matter. Black and blue lives can matter simultaneously. I don't have to pick a side. There's no side to life. false dichotomies that we're asked to participate. You know, are you on this team or that team? What are you talking about? There is no team. Black people are hurting and suffering. Yes. To make the servants of our legislative process suffer for those things. So no, blue lives do matter. It's the false dichotomy that we have to be mindful of. Because if I can keep you in that false dichotomy, and wet people, you won't see this in your notes, but if I can keep people in that false dichotomy, this is the brain. It's a bad version of the brain, but it's a brain. On that false dichotomy, it impacts this part of the brain. And what is that? Again, it's a bad example of a brain. But what is the most basic primary part of the brain called? What's another word for the brain stem?
I heard it called the snake brain.
The snake brain, the reptilian brain, the reptile brain. And what does the reptile brain look for? It looks for two things.
Fight or flight.
Right, fight or flight. But what does fight or flight? Why are we looking to fight or flight? Something that is starts with a D and ends in dangerous. Right? Yes. So the reptilian brain is looking for danger. And it's looking for a mate. It's looking for those two things. And we'll talk about that. That's another workshop. The second part is another workshop. Right? So the reptilian brain is looking for danger. Then the next level of the brain is what? Brain, right? So the mammal brain. So we have the reptile brain, and this is where emotions kind of come in. How I feel about stuff comes in the mammalian brain. What we call the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex. And this is where all executive functions happen. Language and how we learn about language, and language that we use and how we think about what we want to do. The critical thinking happens in our neocortex. Choose a side that Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter or all lives matter and no other lives matter, that keeps me in my reptilian brain. And so what am I constantly looking for? Danger. So when I hear Black Lives Matter, I automatically assume that means that no other lives matter, and B, that white lives don't matter, because I'm in this kind of polarized danger situation when I need to be my mind and be a critical thinker. And so the conversation is a false dichotomy. It's not real. We don't have to pick sides on what it is. They can be true simultaneously. Doing that, then we fall for the tricks of the day, the tricks of the trade, which is you have to pick a side. And then we get caught up in it. It's just like you'll hear things like this idea of reverse discrimination. Has anyone ever heard that conversation? Reverse discrimination. It's the most asinine thing I've ever heard in my life. Why? If we look at it linguistically, it is a noun and it is a verb. Can you have a reverse verb? Can you have a reverse noun? So reverse discrimination doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Although if you listen to what people's feelings are about that, their feelings make sense, right? So we'll talk about that as well. I want to get you to move around and whatnot, but let's take about a 5-minute break. We'll finish the rest of this out. Is that good? Questions so far?
I just want to add, 1 year later, just 2 blocks down, a white man that danced in front of my car instead of moving. So the thing I'm mentioning only happened twice in my life. But it's kind of interesting that they happen only blocks apart and a year apart. Somebody would have a story on how bad Black people are, or Somali, and what are they doing, and yet it happens from all people.
It does.
Look at that.
It does.
So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right.
Yeah. So let's take 5, and then we'll come right back. There's some coffee back there.
We don't dance well enough.
It's a creamer.
Did I hear you say that you sent that letter to the Insurance Council's freezer?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Did I hear you say that you saw the lister, the Insurance Council?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yes, that's where,
I
I'm
was
sure
just
that's where I
hoping-
saw it.
Good, okay.
It
It is.
Yeah. Where do you work?
It was when I was in partnership.
Oh.
We had brought him in for a couple of trainings that I had done
test.
previously. And so
All right.
Yeah.
I've heard some of the,
Anywhere in any of your offices that you think
Yeah, no.
catalog or.
This is what we. Yeah, well,
We have.
wanted.
Yeah.
But I was thinking before I looked at the
residents
shop.
of
Or.
Yeah, or.
Schools
Yeah.
that have preschool in them, also have scholarship dollars available.
I thought you ended up with some folks.
So that's the line.
Okay.
And then we also do parent ed classes. So we have 3 locations that we have DLL dollars for, families with children who have English as their second language. And those, so that's 3 preschool for 4-year-olds. Living in our community, they have in the west of the suburb of Milwaukee.
Right, no.
I'm nervous when I, because they say.
Or voluntary free preschool
And so
for
then
4-year-olds.
they line up
So,
something's going
So,
on.
aside from that, we also have student scholarship
Go,
dollars,
go,
capital
go,
scholarship
yay, yay.
dollars
I
for
felt like
other
I was in the
qualified
Tour de France.
locations.
As I come off my bike.
The only locations
You're
that fall
so-
are.
You've got some guy who stands in front of them.
Henry's
He's got these kids who are cheering this.
all
And
around
he's
Coast
biking
Cabin
and
and St.
trying,
Clair.
looks like she's trying to go fast.
that's the one that we
Oh, that's wonderful.
so that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have people who are not.
Yeah.
Most of our complexes are outlined, since we cover,
is that anywhere where I could put our social security?
yeah, that's what I was gonna say, I would actually ask
Want
if
to
you
do
could.
more of those?
Sure, yeah, because I would ask.
But
our
those
property
people who
director
want it,
first. I
who
don't
want
think
to find
that's
fault,
right.
are looking for
You know,
proofs.
I can't believe you have openings. Let's do another 4 of them.
All right.
It's hard when you're in the moment.
Yeah,
to
the
be
thing
thinking,
that we didn't
This is an individual.
decipher on here, which location.
Yeah, because, and if it happened any more than twice in my life, I sure don't recall it.
And we'll talk you through it, let you
The
know
only
where
2 times
I've
it
had
happened.
this slow walking in front of me. I've never had people.
Yeah, not only stop the call from the other side, or to have one literally in front of it and dance. And he was like 7 years
Yeah,
old,
that's what I read, yep.
How old?
70.
Oh my God.
And I thought, what's the point?
Pretty sure it's just.
It's gonna be interesting to know what that point was.
And for both of them, I did just smile because the horn, race the engine, throw a finger up, yell, and all of those would have,
Nothing was good was gonna happen for
right.
anyone.
All I knew that 10 minutes later, those I would have residual things to deal with.
Yeah.
And the way I handled it, I had no residual things because it was over.
Yeah.
You know what? If you're online and watching, if you could just send me an email. I was looking for a chat. I didn't see anything in the chat, but if there's something specific you want me to address or a thought that you have, I can address that. Just send me
I
an
work with
email,
Peggy,
Andre at AMI.com. The chaplain's not sure.
It's having insights, otherwise we wouldn't have.
So there's all
Right.
Basically, a family that's reproduced,
And what I feel most sorry for people, I don't care what color or age or sex they are, is dealing with the fear. You know, when I hear from Suleiman that he would never venture out as far as Foley, because rural to him is 95 going east. So I'd never get into rural Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I go, when you said, well, first of all,
You're
you're a
welcome.
ticket,
I was gonna say,
but
pass
I
on
didn't
some
feel safe, and I
connections
thought,
to.
oh my God. Now, I would say the same thing in going somewhere
She used to work
South
there in
St. Cloud or
Clinton,
Minneapolis. And yet,
Amy
you know,
Carter
when I
is the housing
visited a
piece
brother that
I
lives in
used
South
to work
Minneapolis,
with
I don't have it.
and,
And there's a mix
so they're
of
placing
every
people who sometimes
kind of culture
are
and
new
race
to the
there.
area or
But that's
have young
because
children that may
I
need to be
know that he
involved.
lives there, I know he's.
I'll pass it on.
And it's just a fear,
I'll see you tomorrow.
it's not of. During the day, I don't care where it is.
So you could forward, or is she a part of the?
You know, I
She's a
know
part
that there are a lot
she's
of
part of
people
council.
who
And you know, sometimes I
Caucasian
think when
colors
we're
that,
inundated with some of those,
people
when you
from
click
my
on it, you
hometown
go, oh, it's
peers.
about kids. You don't
There are
necessarily
those that
think,
will
okay,
come
in
in
my
and
line
talk
of,
to
you know,
Yeah.
associations.
I don't think we put in solid
He's afraid to go past 95.
But yeah, I can definitely pass some of that on too, because it's getting the word out that makes it a difficult.
And the money
And I was
didn't
talking
come
to
to
an
us
employee from
for
City of St. Cloud
the
last
voluntary
night.
free preschool until
And
2 weeks before school started.
We're going tomorrow, I mean, to a Cold Spring to know, because he wants to move there that are.
And trying to
So, oh, you found a vending machine. I wasn't sure. Where was that? Is that into the hall? Oh, you brought it from home.
So how about going to
Eat snacks.
And he goes, oh no, I never go to 18.
So just really quickly, I want to thank you so much for taking the break and being here and being about me. I'm also so I currently do these kinds of workshops for communities, and I'm trying to get into communities outside of the Twin Cities. So I'll be doing a similar session in Rochester. Looking for a place in Bemidji. So if anybody knows. Would like to do some stuff in St. Cloud, because I really think that the communities around the Twin Cities need to have these, and I want to encourage that as much as possible. Although in our interaction, it's been very one way, but hopefully I'll change that in the second half. One of the things I talked a little bit about is this idea that the Constitution is by which we can have these kind of conversations, and why we need to have these conversations. So, so that's important. Oh, I just want to say that I'm also on the board of ACAP, which is a community action program in the Twin Cities. So we monitor Head Start, housing initiatives, all sorts of stuff around making sure people have opportunities to get out of poverty.
Now you're talking about a community action program, or is ACAP an entity in itself?
Yep, ACAP is an entity in and of itself. It's Anoka County Community Action Program.
Okay.
And there's one here, I think it's part of the TRICAP. Is that right? Yeah, so TRICAP is 3-county program.
Okay.
So there's that. So I engage in the community around those things as well. So I'm also a Rule 114 mediator. So do lots of community mediations and whatnot. Help me to be able to do this kind of work that can seem contentious. But if you understand human beings, you won't find it so contentious. So on page 3, the center circle around those values is the pie of all human knowledge. And if you could cut that into 3 pieces, the first 2 pieces being the size of what you know of everything there is to know. The second piece being the size of what you know you do not know. Piece is in just a second. So the first piece is, what's the size of what you know of everything that there is to know? All science, all math, all language, all history. Piece being the size of what you are aware of that you don't know. For example, I know that I do not know Kung Fu. I don't know how to fly a space shuttle, and I certainly want to be your heart surgeon, right? So those are the things that I don't know. So as you were doing those two pieces, what did you recognize about what you know and what you don't know?
Or I don't know.
There's a lot more that you don't know than what you actually do know, right? And so what do you think that third piece of the pie is? What you don't know, or I call it a blind spot, right? I call it a blind spot. The way to talk about that is we can call that a paradigm. P-A-R-A-D-I-G. And I used to say paradigm because I was hooked on phonics. But it's paradigm. The paradigm is simply the way you see the world. And who introduced you to your first set of paradigms? Or who was primarily responsible for introducing you to a way of seeing the world? Your parents, right? And where did your parents get their way of seeing the world? From their parents. And where did their parents get there, right? And so what's the problem with this paradigm that they keep passing along? What's the problem?
They pass along the blind spots.
We pass along the blind spots as well, right? So the majority of this pie, at least in my case, the majority of the pie is the blind spot. Continually pass that along. And the blind spots are things that you don't know, and it's basically things you don't know because you're human. Example. Love my parents. They taught me great stuff. They put me in great programs. They did lots of summer stuff, lots of enrichment activities, but they never could have taught me about sexting. Why did my parents not tell me about sexting?
Cell phones didn't exist
back then, right? They're going to come up short. How we see the world is going to come up short. The journey is to try to reduce spot and expand what we know through a process of learning, right? And when we stop learning, then we get frozen. And when we get frozen and the context changes, we become dinosaurs. And what was the result of the dinosaurs not being able to adapt? Extinction, right? So in 1863, what happened in 1863? That is of note.
History and geography.
I hated history and geography.
I hated them, yeah.
Oh, you hated them. Okay.
I think that's the Emancipation Proclamation.
The Emancipation Proclamation. What did the Emancipation Proclamation do?
Freed the slaves.
It freed the slaves from what? From what?
From slavery in this country.
Some slavery. So what was slavery? Important thing to recognize. What was slavery?
Well, because we have the internet, some would say comfortable taken care of way in life and trade for labor. Others would say it was a very perverse, angry, mean way of barely living. I don't know.
The slavery was an economic system. So we can add those moral pieces all we want, but ultimately people found a way to get cheap labor, which was free, to steal or to buy cheaply. Economy. Slavery was an economic system where people were used as cogs in that wheel, right? And so when we talk about this idea of slavery, what we're talking about is people being freed from this economic system. This becomes important because it transforms. It doesn't stop. Just a second. So in 1863, the freeing the slaves out of that economic system, human beings in that system of bondage. 1865 is the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratifying what? Slaves out of, so it becomes constitutional. So does anyone have one of those smartphones? You have one of, so can you take one of your smartphones and look up the 13th Amendment to the Constitution? Just look that up for me. Amendment to the Constitution. All right. So and then the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment to the Constitution were also ratified. 1880 is when the ratified protecting people's ability to participate in the democratic system, right? So what does the 13th Amendment say? What does it say?
You ready?
Yes.
The 13th Amendment declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Okay, so stop right there, because you paused. You said why did you pause as you were reading that?
For crimes.
Okay, so we won't have slavery except for punishment for a crime. Right. Okay, so I have a friend that is mean to me, and they say, you know what? I'm going to stop being mean to you except on Tuesdays. Have they stopped being mean to me? No. Why? Because they have an exception. So an exception means that you're not stopping what you're doing. You're just qualifying what you're doing. So we have that. Can somebody else look up, anybody else have a smartphone? So you did a good job. Thank you so much. Anybody else have a smartphone? Can you look up something called white code? Can you look up black codes? You look up black codes and you look up white codes, right? Minutes for that, because your phones are very smart. So they will get to that. So this idea, so the 13th Amendment said that no more slavery except committed crimes, right? And does that make sense or not make sense? As slavery, shouldn't you be like, at all? I mean, I don't know. That's just me, right? That's just me. So the 13th Amendment ratifies that. About these white codes. What do you got for white codes? What came up for white codes?
Lots of Pokemon.
Pokemon. Right? So Pokemon, that's enough. That's fine. That's good. Pokemon works, right? Can you read the black codes?
The black codes were laws passed by southern states in 1865 and 1866. These laws had the intent and the effect of restricting African Americans' freedom and of compelling them to work in a labor economy based on low wages or debt.
Okay, stop right there just for a second. Happened
1865 and
just stop right there. So what else happened in 1865?
The 13th Amendment.
The 13th Amendment said no slavery of a crime. So what did the South then say in 1865? What will we make a crime? (1865) They came up with these things called the black codes. There are no white codes. They didn't make codes up for white people.
Pokemon is not even mentioned.
And no Pokemon is mentioned in black codes, right? Having this conversation about this idea of Black Lives Matter, we got to go to the 13th Amendment, because that's everything that 13th Amendment is talking about. We won't have slavery unless. And so the exception was a call to the South to create black folks. Now, this is the funny thing. That particularly those of us in the North, we like picking on the South. We love picking on the South. Because that the South was barbaric and wrong. But who was the South selling their cotton and grain to? Exporting it, or they were selling it to the North. Somebody say something that I thought was very interesting. They said, people don't care. People who like hot dogs don't want to know how they're made. People who like hot dogs don't want to know how they're made. So when we talk about the dastardly deeds of the South, the North can say that because we didn't care how we got those cheap products. In this whole system as well, right?
No.
Go ahead. You don't think the North was implicit in what was going on in the South?
At different times in history, and today would be much easier with media and things, but to feel, I would never feel implicitly involved because I was getting cotton from a southern state that used slaves. If I needed cotton and everything that needs to be done in the course of the day, and how could I have enough time or energy to care where it came from?
Right.
An uncle or an aunt, working 60 hours in a factory that doesn't have any time of their day and feels like a slave. And that stuff is going to the South or to...
Yep. And the tiredness and the fatigue and the busyness, lives matter, disrupts people's everyday activities. Because in that disruption, what are you now doing? No. In the disruption, what are you doing? What is it causing you to do?
Stop.
To have to stop what you're doing and at least pay attention, or because, and it's funny because not everybody in the North was complacent with how the system was operating. There were particularly white people who said this is wrong. They disrupted stuff. They were called abolitionists, to make the everyday person think about what is happening with these products and what's going on. And us not thinking about those things allow these things to be perpetrated. It's very interesting. Also, in manufacturing in India, they have these huge warehouses where I will be transparent. I used to smoke these clove cigarettes. They're a clove leaf, and the leaf is rolled and it's tied with a little string. And I thought I was cool because it was a little cigarette and it smelled good. It smelled like incense, it was cool, blah, blah, blah. And then I saw a video. Cigarettes were made. I was convicted. Little kids to tables and require them to make so many of these little cigarettes by hand. These are rolled by hand and tied by hand. And if they don't get to see their family, blah, 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 this whole thing. And I was like, I can't participate in that. Why? Because I became conscious of it. I have friends that were not conscious, that did not go out and look for that information, still use the stuff. Use that when I try not to get a new cell phone if I don't have to, because I know that the materials that are coming out of Africa are done through slave labor. Like we talk about blood diamonds, there's taconite mines and other tanzanite and other things that are way more precious than diamonds that people are paying for through blood and doing all this stuff. But I have to be, does that wear on me? Does it take time? Is it tiring? Yes, it's tiring. But if I don't, I can't sleep at night not recognizing somebody's paying so-called freedom I get because I'm a member of a particular society, right? Somebody's paying for that. I have to be mindful of that. Now, here's the interesting thing. So we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which was supposed to protect folks, but then we have to have this whole conversation in the 60s all over again. The 64, what was 64 about? It was about civil rights. Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about that in the 13th Amendment? Didn't that give people, didn't the 14th Amendment give people civil rights? What was the 65 Voting Rights Act about? Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about that in the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1880? What's the problem? The problem was that people kept finding ways around the system so that they did not have to give everybody equal access. And they used this little 4-letter word to make those distinctions. There's race. We don't have to give those people those things because they're not like us. They're not fully human, right? If you look at any of the science, particularly of this particular time, Native Americans and African Americans were not considered human. Or we don't have to give them this stuff. If you look at the right after 1880, at the end of the of Reconstruction, and this I would call the first Reconstruction. 1963 to 1880, I would refer to that as the first Reconstruction. 1964 to 1965, and actually I would say it probably started in 1955 down to 1967. I would call that the second Reconstruction. I would suggest that we are in a third Reconstruction, because as these things change, in 1860s, the end of the Civil War, slavery, and the end of slavery. And what does slavery turn into? Because it transformed into something else. What was it called? Where you cropped and you shared. Sharecropping, that's right, right? So sharecropping. And then that changed into low-paying and low-wage jobs in the 70s. Everybody was doing great. Recession of the 80s, and then going, and then we had the birth of something called mass incarceration. Drugs happening here. This became the setting stage for mass incarceration, the war on drugs, the war on poverty. Right? And who were the targets of those initiatives? Right? So that's why people say those things. Well, that's why they say Black Lives Matter, because it's been a pinnacle point throughout history as to why those things there. It is not to say that no one else matters. Laws and the Constitution, and how things have been shaken now, they're certainly concerned about. There's a video I want to share. I've got about 10 minutes. And actually, the video stream has 3 videos. The first is how to race bait, and this idea that we have to have this polarized conversation. The second is plays out, right? So, for example, there's in the second video, there's a young man who's in downtown Indianapolis, who must be on drugs or something. He's butt naked. He's running around. He's hitting police officers. They're tasing him. He gets tackled. He gets up. So, and this happened in minutes that they're working with this dude, right? There's another, and again, context is everything, and context is different. But when you've been experiencing this kind of stuff, when you see this stuff, it has an impact on you, right? And part of that video shows a man in Atlanta, a war veteran, his knees, crawling and growling like a dog. What might that suggest to you? You see a grown man on his butt naked, on his hands and knees, growling like a dog. What might that suggest to you?
Mentally ill. That
he's mentally ill. What do? They shoot him. Now, again, context is everything. Different police agencies, different policing philosophies. Impact when you stop looking at periods, you can start seeing. When you stop seeing periods, you can start seeing dots. And so, in that particular piece, How to Race Bait talks very much about this that I laid out, and how these things are multiplying. Lori Woodard offers some suggestions that all of these things are impacting all of us. There's the first person trauma, and then there is the vicarious or the secondary trauma. secondary trauma look like, or how does that, what does that mean to be secondary, or to have secondary trauma?
Directly to you, but because you've been a part of the culture or connected somehow, you feel you're directly in that experience.
Right. Now, I don't know about you, but playground to bully me. What did the bully have to do to get the bully's point across? Bully one of my friends and made sure that I watched it. Why? Because what's the implication?
To fear them.
I would expect to fear them because what?
You're next.
I'm next. I did this to them, and I'll do this to you. For Black and brown people, it's very interesting that when playing of these tragedies of shootings, and I'm on a mission right now that I think parental guidance should be put on these videos when they're put on social media, that there should be a trigger warning about what's happening on this video, and that at a certain time it gets pulled and pushed off to a particular adult monitored site so that we don't have to see these revictimizations consistently happening, because it takes a toll on us as human beings. It gets us to a place where we start feeling that sadness. What do we do? You know what that's called? It's called depression. Why are we feeling depression? Because we're grieving our humanity. As my brothers and sisters are killed or hurt, whether they be All Lives Matter, whether it be Black Lives Matter, whether it be the police. So the chief here in St. Cloud, I knew him before he was who he is today. I have great care for that man. I don't want anything to ever happen to him or to any of his staff, because I've learned, I know them. But when we see these tragedies, we have to think about both sides. How is this affecting both sides of this? And one of the things that, and I want to make this really clear, is that for people of color, I'll go out on a limb and say this, that what I found in my study and my research and the work that I've been doing, that is that white people are able to compartmentalize another white person's behavior. That it becomes that particular person because they had some specific and particular idiosyncrasies that caused them to do that particular thing. Color, when it happens to one of us, be it a victory, be it a failure, be it an embarrassment, or be it adulation, it happens to all of us. Joe Louis winning in boxing was not just boxing for himself. He was boxing for all of so-called African American. When we see failures, when we see things hurt or hurts, we can't that and say that's just that person's victory or that person's failure, mostly because the United States has not allowed us to do that. Lynching had a profound impact on the American community, because lynching was not just about this one person. What happened to Emmett Till was not about Emmett Till. Everyone else, if you come down here, this is what you will do. Because if it was just about Emmett Till, they would have done that to that boy, buried the boy, and called it justice. But that's not what happened. They made an example, a display of him. When we talk about this idea of strange fruit for African Americans, so when African Americans see the shootings replayed and replayed and replayed on YouTube or the news or whatever, we get it. And the frustration is we already know the lesson. System. Do what the system says. But I will tell you that most people that I know, and I will speak for myself as well, I try to avoid any kind of interaction that is questionable at best. Questionable, I try to avoid it because I want to be in control of what happens. You know, police officers and so forth. I try to avoid any interaction with that when I think it's going to be questionable. In my city, my neighborhood, I know my officers, so I'm like, cool, you know, hey, pull me over, you know, call me accountable and stuff I need to be accountable for. I get it. But when I get into remote areas or rural areas and I'm a little bit more skeptic, I'm driving the speed limit. I'm making sure that my stuff is right, that I have it all in the hand, in the glove box, so I'm ready to go, because I don't want it to be anything more than what it needs to be. Know that is tiring. Just like thinking about your everyday services, particularly in the South. Where did this cotton come from? Well, how did I get this good price? And blah, blah, blah. That can be tiring in a life where you're doing that all the time. And so I would suggest that we have tons of great officers who are doing great jobs, who are in the community, who are building relationships. And we need to encourage them, because their bad brothers and sisters are overpowering their messages. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do as human beings. If you look down at page 3, that's funny. Seems like we're never going to get off of page 3. But so two things. One is, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We see it through our gender, our race, our geography, our government. All those things show us who we are. And if we look at the mules in number 3, no but, yes but, and yes and. Yes and actually gets us to, right? I would have students that would say, well, this is racist. And I would say, yes. And what are you going to do about it? Right? Yes and. So I recognize their pain, their anguish, but I also need them to do something more than just stick with their pain and their anguish. So let's flip over to page 4. Got the terms of this timeline, and that slavery is an economic system, right? So when we talk about mass incarceration, guess what? Guess what's attached to those bodies going to jail, to county jails, to prisons, attached to those bodies. Right? So per diems, so slavery was an economic system, and then when we talk about this idea of privatizing prisons, that hurts me. I don't know how to at such a deep level. There's the idea of diversity, inclusion, and affirmative actions. You can read the difference between those 3 categories. Ultimately, it is our human intentions that actually change human behavior. If you go to page 5, we talk a little bit about this idea of historical trauma, institutional racism, poverty, and whiteness. I would say that historical trauma is all of this stuff that's happened in the past that keeps resurging, right? So why did we deal with these things in the 1880s, and we had to deal with it again in the 1960s? Because so when I see someone hurt, that gives me trauma, and that can also be historical trauma. Institutional racism, and I would say any institution that was built before Emancipation Proclamation is a racist institution, right? So so there are 22 states added to the Union before or since Emancipation Proclamation. There have been universities, there have been all sorts of institutions built that everybody could not participate in. And so I would say that is the basis for institutional racism. The idea of poverty, we typically talk about poverty. When we talk about poverty, we talk about the people, but we never analyze the systems that people are trying to operate in. And then lastly, a barrier to my humanity is this concept of whiteness. Whiteness is problematic mostly for white people. And why is whiteness problematic for white people? How does whiteness work? What's the assumption about whiteness?
Well, I think by others that it's a privilege.
So that is a privilege, right?
That in other things, politics gives us favors.
Yep.
I don't necessarily see it as that, but I think there's that impression.
Yep. So there certainly is that impression. What else is problematic about whiteness? What makes whiteness work?
You don't have to think about it.
You don't have to think about it. What's the underlying assumption of whiteness? White people are created equal. And it's not true. You can ask white people themselves. What do white people say about white people who don't measure up to the level of sophistication that other white people think they should? What do they get called? Trash. What else do they get called? What's that?
Dirt bags.
Dirt bags, right? Hoosiers, solo cup people, right? So white people have this hierarchy of whiteness in their own so-called community. And whiteness has been problematic because what it has done is it stripped people of their cultural identity and made them a thing. So whiteness, that's why whiteness is problematic. Flip over to page 6. We recognize that there are three constructs that we have to identify. And this is where we can start to be actionable in our own lives and in our families. There's this idea of bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination. So I teach at a psychology school, and one of the things that we teach is this thing called cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy, which basically means that you think about your behaviors, and that helps you to augment your behaviors. And so in cognitive behavior therapy, one of the foundation principles is that emotions plus thought dictate behaviors. So if I want to change my behaviors, then I have to be aware of my emotions and my thoughts so that I can change my behavior. So what we understand is that bigotry is an emotional state. I've diagnosed bigots as being ignorant. Has anyone ever heard? That is not the case. What it is that they are emotional. And how do you move people's emotions? How do you change emotions? What's the most powerful emotion? Love. Bigot. What? Aren't I supposed to get rid of them? Or am I supposed to get away from them? No, you're supposed to love them. And I would suggest that you tether yourself to a bigot. So if you have one in your workplace, in your family, that you tether them. What does tether mean? I have 2 Great Danes. Sometimes their tether is really long, and sometimes it's really short, depending on the circumstances and the environments that I'm in. You tether yourself to a bigot and you love them. Sometimes you can love them from a distance, right? Other times they need to be close to you. So those family gatherings, Uncle Jim is telling bad and inappropriate jokes. You go and you talk with Uncle Jim, like, really, Uncle Jim? What is that, right? You love him, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's taken me about 3 years, but I think I understand Black Lives Matter, not as much as many people do. And that's differentiated from All Lives Matter, Blue Lives. I think I understand that, and I get it, and I think it's good. I know where people at. However, when we look here, like, the words that jump out of impact versus intent, when you have a stoppage of traffic, is to have people, first of all, become more greatly aware, because if our message isn't getting through, we got to do something different. Something different, which is very, and even potentially bad to people's lives, that could prevent life and death as a result of emergency vehicles and cause accidents and so on. So when that impact is very adverse to a large number of people who are backed up on the highway and storming, possible advantage or other than awareness, which could be obtained in some other way, how can that possibly be good for a Black Lives Matter movement?
Answer that question, because I don't have an answer for that.
But at some level, they must think that there is some value to this. Basically, bust shit up. I mean, how possibly whoever the leadership is that helps coordinate and cause that, where can they be coming from for a successful outcome when that is the mechanism used, which alienates and isolates and gets people against them and causes more conflict?
And so what like I said, I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that I think you and I have the answer. We would not be having this conversation had some of those things not happened, right? And so I think I don't know about their leadership. I do know because I don't like everything that they do. I don't condone everything that happens. I do understand why they do it. I would suggest that out into the atmosphere, and we listen for who else is outraged about this. One voice that is outraged about specifically police and brutality. And that is their voice. Now, if other people are just as outraged, we should start hearing some other voices saying that we're outraged. Right now, the only people...
I'm one of those that's outraged. I get it. Whether it's marijuana laws, triggered in the 20s and 30s, because primarily I believe it was blacks back then that used it. And so what? It's not that then they should be punished. I don't know if they would have done things differently as a political structure in the U.S. rather than outlawing it and doing what I think ultimately they're doing today anyway in Colorado, California. So the merits of it are being expressed. And I would want to voice my opinion and support. It's not going to be behind a movement intent.
Right,
so
and that's not what I'm
alienated
suggesting.
And I'm quiet
because
I don't want to be associated with that kind of negativity in society.
And
even though I understand what they're doing.
And what is it? What does that do? It's because quite frankly, even the civil rights movement of the 60s was not a monolithic movement. There was SCORE was a part of that. There were what is now like the Southern Poverty Law Center. There were lots of different parts of this movement, and so as things changed and shifted, those pieces were able to kind of branch out. Right now, there's not any, by not being able to voice your stuff, even if it's not in support of them, but to say what you are in support of, not voicing it is not offering a counter narrative. The people who, and it's been proven time and time again, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The people who make the most noise get the most attention. If folks aren't saying anything else, and good intentioned folks, well-meaning folks, if they're not saying anything, that becomes the only voice that gets heard. It would be so interesting to me to have a group of white people who say, we are a group of white people, we're not connected with Black Lives Matter, but we are outraged about what is happening in this particular community. That would be groundbreaking.
See, and I do say those kinds of things, but I am stifled and quieted because in order to gain levels of support on an ongoing basis that would matter, I have to be very careful when I introduce that so that the message is listened to and something is done. And I can't, like has gone on in Minneapolis more so than other places that at least I'm aware of in Minnesota. That type of action by Black Lives Matter stifles and quiets me in my support.
Yep, and I would suggest is that you measure. It's called wisdom. So what you're using is wisdom. So I need to be strategic and use wisdom, and when I can do these things. But if you are an advocate doing it, right? You just have to be use wisdom and be strategic and have.
And so does Black Lives Matter movements in order to gain a wider base of more generous support.
Yep. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's what they want. That's what we would want for them, but that might not be what they want. And so, and I believe that they have the right to do it, and I understand why they're doing it. I also am going to do what I do and do what I know to do. And what I know to do is to build bridges, to have conversations like this, to empower people to speak up in their circles of influence. Go ahead.
So I've had conversations that start out hard, some of the things that you raised, but because of what the Black Lives Matter is doing, I can say, hey, that's the wrong strategy. What strategy are we going to use?
Yeah.
And so because of what they did, even if people didn't agree with it, and I don't say whether I do or not in the conversation, okay, let's not argue about that. Let's decide what we can do. And so there's been more positive. I don't think I would have had those conversations other action had happened.
Yeah.
And so it's hard, as frustrating as, unfortunately, I don't live in the Twin Cities, so I'm not stopped in traffic. Being as that has been for people to be in that position, I have responsibility then to step forward and not let the conversation stop there. I do, and what can we do?
And it's basic physics, right? For every action, what? Equal and opposite reaction. There is no action. So even though they may be misstepping, and I would tell my students this all the time. If you fail it, we know what we got to work on, right? If you mess up, we know what we got to work on. Anything I won't ever know. If they hadn't done what they've done, we would never have this. We would never be at this level of consciousness to have this conversation. We wouldn't have anything to push off of and say, well, I don't want to be a part of that.
Or if things were done differently, we could be beyond where we're at.
Really?
Yes.
With this kind of history, we'd be giant steps. We keep repeating the same thing over and over again.
Well, I'm not going to take responsibility for the past. I'm only talking about the present.
Thank you so much. Thank you. No. So I agree with you, but that didn't happen. If I was born blind, I might have had it, but that didn't happen. What I got. And they are who I have to kind of push off of and see. Just the last couple of things, and I know we're 5 minutes over. If you just give me 30 seconds, and I'll let you go. The stages of grief. I think that's what we're grieving our humanity, because we're all looking for. We can learn, change, and grow. People do what they think works, even when it doesn't work. That all human behavior is goal directed. We talked about those goals, and then attitude is a side effect of goal accomplishment. An attitude is not actually a thing. It is a sign of something that is either happening or not happening. Page 8, just wanted to draw your attention to the fallacy of this idea of race. And I mentioned it before because that became the defining factor of a lot of these laws. I spent a lot of time talking about this idea of race and black people. But if you read what the federal government says today about racial and ethnic groups, it does not even make sense. For example, white people are any people having any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Did you think that Iraqis and Iraqis were white, or Moroccans were white? But it says nothing in all this description about Ukrainians, everybody from Russia as having a race or racial category. Why is that? Because all of those things are politically motivated. This concept of race is a political tool used to subdivide people. Page 9, we talk about this idea of what evil is and what is not evil, and we do that balance of the power wheel coming right out of the domestic violence work from Duluth, and then this idea of micro inequities and discretionary effort as they relate to one another. Page 10, why are people behaving the way they do? Because oftentimes people are suffering from Han, which is a deep resentment that conquered people, particularly this Korean concept that conquered people have towards the conquerors. And then there's more facts about the 13th Amendment and this idea of diversity fatigue. Page 11, we talked a little bit about this idea of whiteness, and when all lives matter, people come first. People come before property, they come before products, people come first when all lives matter. And then on page 12, for the dignity and honor in being human. None of us brought ourselves here. We all need to give and receive the dignity and honor in being human just because we exist. My name is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this discussion. I just want to say thank you for joining us here at AM Horizons Training Group. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us, and you can reach me at andre@amhorizons.com. Or you can give us a call at 651-998-9376. We look forward to helping you nurture your seeds of change.